We are well familiar with stories about how people traveled on ships or planes, got into terrible storms that destroyed all the passengers of the ship, and then found themselves alone on an uninhabited island, full of dangers. The most popular works of art created on this topic are Daniel Defoe's novel Robinson Crusoe and the movie Cast Away with Tom Hanks in the lead role. These works tell about the difficult events that happened to the heroes, not without a touch of romanticism, characteristic of artistic films or literature. However, history knows several real cases where people had to survive far from civilization, being on an island where not a single soul lived. And the conditions that these lucky ones faced in their adventures were much harsher than in books, series, or films. Pavel Vavilov. In late August 1942, a naval battle took place between the Soviet icebreaker Alexander Siberyakov and the German cruiser Admiral Scheer. The battle took place near the island of Domashny, located in the Kara Sea. The icebreaker did not have the same firepower as the opponent's ship, so the Siberyakov suffered a defeat, and almost the entire crew was killed in a fire on the deck. Those who managed to survive were taken prisoner by German sailors. Only one sailor, Pavel Vavilov, a soldier who was a stoker on board the icebreaker, managed to escape. The surviving crew member managed to get to the lifeboat and find an emergency supply matches, crackers, and a barrel of water. Vavilov also managed to catch a small bag of oats and a set of winter clothes from the water. Having gathered supplies and waiting for the Germans to leave, Pavel began to move towards the island of Beluga, from where the lighthouse signals were visible. The stoker had to spend 34 days on the island, which was uninhabited except for polar bears. As a shelter from predators, the sailor chose the upper platform of the lighthouse, which was the safest on the entire island. In September, snow fell on the island, thanks to which Pavel cooked a porridge from oats and ate it for more than a month. When the food supplies ran out, the desperate Vavilov was discovered by members of the steamship Sako, which was passing by the island. A plane was sent to the rescue, piloted by the legendary pilot Ivan Cherevichny. After being rescued from the cold island, Pavel Vavilov continued his normal life and managed to work on board the icebreakers Lenin and Georgy Sedov. Ada Blackjack. Ada's fate before the disaster was unenviable. She had given birth to 3 children, 2 of whom died without living to be a year old, and a few months after the terrible events, her husband also died. To get out of poverty, the girl decided to give her surviving son to an orphanage, so that he could temporarily live there while his mother went to work. Blackjack was able to quickly find work. She was invited to become a participant in an Arctic expedition organized by Canadian Alan Crawford. Ada was to work as a cook and seamstress. The expedition began on September 16, 1921, when a group of 5 people set out for Wrangel Island to beat the Japanese who wanted to claim ownership of the land. In addition to Ada, the group included Crawford himself, as well as 3 American polar explorers, Lorne Knight, Fred Maurer, and Milton Gall. The first winter, which the expedition had to face, was extremely difficult. Food supplies were rapidly depleted. Hunting did not bring much food, although the expedition had high hopes for it. In January 1922, the American polar explorers decided to return home and invited Ada to join them, but she refused and stayed with Crawford. The Canadian was seriously ill and could not walk, and the girl decided to stay with him and the expedition cat, which was named Vic. The polar explorers who left did not manage to reach home and died on the way, and Crawford died a couple of months after the group split up, so Ada and Vic were left alone with the harsh nature. The girl had to survive on the island for a year and a half, hunting animals and saving herself from the terrible cold. In August 1923, the surviving Ada and Vic were found by a rescue expedition organized by Harold Noyce. Blackjack was returned home, received the promised money, took her child from the orphanage, and later moved to Seattle. The story of the Scottish boatswain who spent almost 4.5 years on the territory of an uninhabited island became the prototype for Daniel Defoe's book about the famous Robinson Crusoe. Alexander Selkirk joined an expedition organized by the English Crown in 1703. The researchers were to head to the shores of South America. Unfortunately, the Scotsman had a bad character and managed to quarrel with the entire crew of the ship, including the captain. When the ship Cinque Ports was sailing past the island of Massa Tierra, another quarrel broke out on board the ship, during which the heated Alexander demanded that he be allowed to go ashore and sail away. The ship's captain gladly fulfilled the request of the annoying crew member, despite the fact that he began to take back his words when he realized that he had said too much. Selkirk remained on the island alone, but he was lucky. Before him, settlers had lived here, who had left cats and goats on the island. Over many years without human control, the animals had become feral, but Alexander began to tame them, as he had plenty of time. The boatswain established production of fresh milk, meat, and hides, from which he made clothes for himself. The cats served the sailor as guards against rats. Wild berries and wild turnips also grew on the island, products that were worth more than gold for the sailor. In the first months of 1709, the ship Duke anchored near the island. The crew of the vessel, which went to the island in search of water and supplies, found Selkirk there, who had managed to settle on its land in 4 years and 4 months. When the Scotsman returned home, he turned into a living legend. Articles about him were written in local newspapers. He was congratulated on his rescue and called the main lucky person in the country. In the pubs visited by the surviving boatswain, there were several dozen people who wanted to treat the legend to beer and get acquainted with his amazing but true stories. A couple of years later, the legendary hermit returned to the life of a sailor, joining the fleet of the Queen of England. During one of the expeditions equipped for the shores of West Africa, the sailor caught yellow fever and soon died, like thousands of sailors during the terrible epidemic. That's all. I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out our other videos on disasters and survival. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.